Hello. I would like to challenge something that Douglas Wilson said in an interview with John Anderson. Now, Douglas Wilson is the closest thing people like me have to a leader in these horrible times. He speaks God's word fearlessly. He's taken a lot of static. I am certainly not David going up against Goliath. I like to think I'm the wise woman of 2 Samuel 14, appealing to David to rethink his presuppositions. Specifically, the presupposition that the exousia, the power, the authority of Romans 13, is somehow exempt from the command against stealing and, by extension, killing and lying. Well, this theological presupposition is essentially that those who win wars and elections, those are the people who become the state, somehow transubstantiate into people that God actually expects to execute justice. And I would like to suggest that nobody is exempt from the commands to respect life, property, and truth, and that everyone will be judged by the same standard. Being a tax-supported state operative does not exempt you from the commands against stealing and murder and lying to other people's harm. I'd like you to watch the following clip and see how it is that this theological presupposition led him to a wrong and harmful practical decision.
I do believe that civil authorities do have a responsibility before God for public health. I do believe that. And so when the orders first came down, we said, okay, what can we do to cooperate? But after about a few weeks, it became obvious to us that this was a massive power grab.
Did you catch that? Because of his presupposition that the civil magistrate has the right to do what they have to do to promote public health, he did not act in time at the very beginning to stop the madness of the quarantines and then the masking and the vaccine mandate. If he had not believed that they had the right to do that, he would have said at the very beginning what I think other people did say. Nobody has the right to keep innocent people, healthy people, trapped in their houses. To his credit, of course, he recovered, and he has been a strong voice that those of us who agree can listen to, learn from, and follow and support. But he put himself behind the curve because of his theological presupposition. Now, anybody can make a mistake, but there's a mistake that he makes that has much worse long-term consequences. And it's one that he has hinted at when he says that Christians should take their children out of the government schools. But there's a big problem with that. Because he believes that people who win wars and elections, i.e. the state, have the right to extort people's property under the name of taxation, he turns a blind eye to the oppression of those who do not want to send their children to tax-funded schools. Again, the very people he wants to help. God is not mocked. You reap what you sow. Doug says that a lot. And in this case, the oppression of anti-tax funded education parents has gone on since Luther, and God has given us over to it. I'd like you to listen to what he has to say, and I'll break in where I think his presuppositions have shot him in the foot.
There are numerous culprits, but I would say one of the central culprits for us would be the conviction that many Christians had that the public schools or the government schools for our kids were somehow on our side.
It seems to me in the comments that follow, he still believes that, or at least he believed it earlier on.
And At the beginning, they were. So in the early 19th century, when the common schools or the public schools were first getting established, it's quite striking that when the great Roman Catholic immigration flood in the mid 19th century happened,
from fleeing Irish poverty,
right? Irish immigration,
famines.
that sort.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church in America formed their own parochial school system in the mid 19th century,
as they did in Australia.
All right. Well, they did that because here the public schools were so Protestant and evangelical. So,
two comments here. One, I would think that the early form of those schools was a honey trap. He says they were on our side. They weren't. It was a honey trap. You get people in, you get them dependent, and then you close the trap, which is what has happened all these decades later. But another more important thing is, because he believes that it's okay for those who win wars and elections to extort property from their neighbors, it doesn't bother him at all that the Protestant schools, which in a moment he'll note that the people at the very top were Unitarian, not Protestant, but the Protestant schools were able to take the money of the Catholics, and then the Catholics had to spend their own money on top of that to build schools. And notice how he doesn't care about that.
Public schools, when they started, the leadership of them was Unitarian and progressive, but the schools were controlled by local school boards, and the populations in the heartland were evangelical and Protestant. And so the public schools had catechisms in them. They had the King James Bible. They had Protestant prayers. And the Roman Catholics who arrived started the parochial school system, not because of secularism in the schools, but because of evangelical Protestantism in the schools.
Should I point out that, much like today, the Roman Catholic influx into the United States was an opportunity for evangelical Christians to evangelize people who they were convinced did not know the gospel. And yet, instead of doing that, they took their money through taxes and forced them to build their own schools. I don't know that that did much to evangelize Catholics. And given the way that progressivism has conquered evangelicalism in the schools, I'm not sure that the reading of the King James Bible or the catechisms or the prayers did a whole lot of good.
They were tax-supported schools, but they were decidedly Christian.
That's assuming that extortion is decidedly Christian. Again, anybody can make a mistake. I wouldn't want Brother Doug going after my life, but I think this is a real big thing that he needs to rethink.
And I remember as a schoolboy, when I was a young boy, praying, being led in prayer at the beginning of the school day by a government school teacher.
Was that government school teacher a Christian? Do you really want your children led in prayer by somebody who's not a Christian?
And that was the last thing to go. So R.L. Dabney, and then in the 19th century, said, predicting this, he said, Christians then must prepare themselves for the following results. All Bibles, prayers, and catechisms will ultimately be driven out of the schools.
Did it occur to Mr. Dabney to warn Christians to stop extorting money from their neighbors to support these schools and to build their own schools privately while they still had the chance? If not, could it have been because they had had public schools since Luther's day and could not imagine schools apart from the government?
And I remember the last of them being driven out of the school, the prayer. But the allegiance that many Christians had to the school that their grandfather went to.
Loyalty dies hard. I still think with affection of the public schools I went to, even the ones where I was miserable. But now they are destroying the lives of the children that go there. And it's hard not to care how the sports teams have gone. It's hard not to care about these things. And yet, Part of the reason is that we've put our money into it. And this is the time when we should be coming out from among them and not touching the unclean thing. But not only is it financially difficult, but it's emotionally difficult as well.
Yeah, these are our schools. And the takeover of the state boards of education and the teachers' colleges and the training of the teachers has been gradual and slow until
the enemy has been content with small victories for centuries. You move it slowly, the people don't get upset, the Overton window moves over. There's never a line where you can say, okay, they've gone too far now. Now we're going to withdraw our support. You go instantly from, it's no big problem, to, well, it's too late to do anything about it now.
Suddenly, a lot of parents woke up and they said, what are you doing?
And they're finding out that they can't do anything in defense. They have to pay, and they're outvoted. What are you going to do?
What are you doing? Like in the recent round of agitated parents at school board meetings illustrates this principle. Some Christians, the movement to private education has been really significant starting in the 1980s. But in the last 2 years, it's accelerated to a major wave. So it went from something like 2 million students being homeschooled in America a couple of years ago to about 6 million now.
Really?
Yeah, so
that's a lot of kids.
The public schools are hemorrhaging now.
I'm not sure an institution that keeps getting the same income but lowers its expenditures should be considered hemorrhaging. Probably the reason this teachers' unions lament the exodus of students to homeschooling and other schools is because they just want power. They understand that they are going to, that the homeschools and the private schools are creating ideological enemies that they're going to have to fight. And they're wondering if they're strong enough to win.
And then a lot of the parents who are staying behind in the public schools are in revolt against the critical theory and all the stuff that's being taught in the schools.
And some of them are actually revolting successfully. However, to the degree that they win, they are succeeding in being able to extort money from their neighbors in order to support schools that do not, or shall I say, no longer teach what those neighbors want. So again, it's a form of oppression. You can't win.
But the reason we are in this position, I think, is because the college students who are Bernie supporters, the college students who want socialism or who want to adopt all this critical theory, this neo-fascism.
Fascism is, according to Mussolini, everything within the state, nothing apart from the state, nothing opposed to the state. What is public education? What is tax-funded education? If you're going to say that tax-funded education is legitimate, there's no reason why you can't tax people to the point where they can no longer afford private education. So you have everything in the state, nothing apart from the state. Is that the way Jesus wants us to be? Furthermore, how does our taking money from the people we're supposed to be evangelizing affect their desire to accept the gospel? Brother Doug is fond of saying that he is not an anarchist. Now, the way he defines anarchy, I think, is as lawlessness, amorality. And I would say that that definition comes from the father of lies. Etymologically, it's like monarchy or oligarchy or anything else, any other kind of archy. It simply means no leader, Nobody is above the law. Nobody is allowed to kill innocent people, take innocent people's property, tell lies about them, or to defraud them. That is the kind of society we need to aim for. And I think it's the kind of society that he's trying to build as he builds a community in Moscow. A community is one where everybody is accepted and respected. I think that Brother Doug would be able to build the kind of community he's trying to build more successfully if he realized that the state has been our enemy ever since Pharaoh kidnapped Sarai in Egypt, and that our best bet is to build communities from the bottom up that do not have taxation, that do not have anybody who is exempt. In the book of Judges, there was no king in Israel. There were no taxes. And the land had rest for 40 years, 3 times, and 80 years once. That never happened under the monarchy in Israel, and it has not happened in the United States. But by God's grace, I think it can happen, maybe for our great-grandchildren. But we need to give them the vision of community, not state. Thank you.